Hey guys, welcome into another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and joining me as always are Tyler and Alex. Alex, how you doing today, dude?
I'm doing good. Everybody is, talking about that video of that kid talking to Cam Newton. I just gotta say, what a fucking brat.
As someone who works with middle schoolers, man, the first rule in arguing with middle schoolers is don't even try. Tyler, how are you doing today, man?
Today I went for a jog, so according to Dolphins Twitter, that makes me better than Justin Herbert.
Oh man, I feel so bad for Tua, man. Like I loved him coming out of college, and he's gonna get traded to the Texans, and his career is going to be over. So
Yep.
Just
What a shame.
unfortunate for him. Anyway, obviously that's all speculation. So we do have a fun show for you guys today. First and foremost, we do have another prospect interview with Houston defensive end Peyton Turner. We're gonna get to that first. And then after that, we're going to do some fun experimenting with the Chargers cap situation and potentially signing free agents, cutting decisions, and things like that. Have some good discussions. I know we've kind of talked about a bunch of it, but I'm going to share my screen of OverTheCap, and so you guys can see really what kind of decision-making process. Obviously, we're not experts at this kind of thing, but having this kind of discussion will show kind of what the Chargers and other teams will be talking about. In a few weeks as well. So let's get to this interview with Houston defensive end Peyton Turner, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, we are so happy to be joined now by Houston defensive end Peyton Turner. Peyton, thanks for taking the time to join us today. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course, couldn't be happier to have someone on. I think the Chargers do need a defensive end, and so we've been doing some cornerbacks and some running back interviews. So it's nice to get someone of a position of need for the Chargers. Maybe let's start with this. For people who are a little unfamiliar with your game, how would you describe your style as a pass rusher, as a defensive end? And maybe who would you compare yourself in terms of players in the NFL?
Violent. If you haven't seen me play, I think I'm a violent player. I compare myself to bigger defensive ends in the league. Cam Jordan for sure. The way he plays, he's pretty versatile on the edge, and then he can bounce down to the inside and rush on that guard. So I'd say Cam Jordan would be a pretty good comparison to the way I play.
I love that comparison, man. Because like if you turn on even just the first game against BYU that you had, you're rushing against the guards, you're rushing with your hand in the dirt, you're rushing out wide as a wide nine, in a 2-point stance. Right. Where does that versatility come from for you, or is that something that you've kind of had to work on throughout your process in college?
Yeah, my first 2 years in college, I was played 4-eye, and we just hold B gap, and then we get to rush outside. So it's not gonna get a lot of production doing that too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, just developing, just continuing to get comfortable on the outside, on the edge, and then just playing around with it. This past year was the first year I had some consistency in the off season, even though we had COVID and everything. But I mean, it's more than I usually have had because I did have an injury sophomore year, so. Sophomore to junior year didn't really have much off season, so this past year I had the off season where I could figure out what I need to do and just mess around with it.
Just mess around with it. I like that. Do you feel like you have a go-to pass rush move, or one that you feel like works better than other ones?
Yeah, I mean, when in doubt, just be violent. So I like long arm. Long arm, my arm's pretty long. Keep them off my body. Speed to power. Then just go one arm. And you got the hump off that. You got a lot of stuff off of one arm, so long arm. So I'd say that's my go-to right there.
Love that, man. Love that. One of the things that I think is a little underappreciated about you in terms of like what draft analysts are talking about is that your motor is just always running, man. I watched the BYU game several times. I watched your game against Tulsa, I think, and you're chasing down guys 10, 15 yards down the field. Are you a fast guy, or is that just an effort thing? Because I know there's a difference between being like fast and being like fast on a football field.
Right. No, I think I'm both. I play fast, I play hard, and I just like playing, competing. So I'm always going to play hard whenever I'm on the field. So that's just how it comes out on the field.
I love that, man. I love that. So let's talk about your Senior Bowl experience, because I think that experience was, it's so valuable this year. I mean, it's always valuable, but this year especially. Because of COVID and because of, there's going to be a combine, but not really. So what was the Senior Bowl experience like for you?
You know, it was a long days, you know, early mornings. But I mean, it was good. It was a good experience. It was nice. You know, you got to talk to guys that play the same position as you or play across the line, and just get to know everybody. So it was cool. You know, I guess networking or whatever. But just talking game, and you know, a lot of people are saying the same things in different ways, and just you know, just sharing game and everything. Got to talk to just about I think all but one, and then I had a Zoom with them. I talked to all the teams though. Everybody was there. But yeah, that experience is invaluable this year, especially since there's no combine, like you said, it's just a medical. So just going in there and just learning from the coaches and just taking it all in. I think it was really valuable.
Was there a certain pass rusher or, you know, just player in general that you were excited to get down to and kind of chat it up with?
Oh, sorry, that last part skipped out. You said and just chat up. Did you say chat with?
Sorry if it cut up. Was there a person like, you know, one of your peers, another pass rusher, an offensive tackle that you were excited to go against in practices in the games? Maybe someone that you were just like really excited to go up against or chat up with.
Oh yeah, Boogie Basham.
Okay.
Of course, yeah, it was cool just cutting up with him, just chopping it up with him. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys, like I said, that you know you get to go against, get to see in real life, in person, because you know there was only so many games this year. I only played really in like 3.5. So I mean, it was cool just talking to everybody. But yeah, I definitely say it was cool chopping up with Boogie and you know Pat Jones. I work out with him, so I mean we're always cutting up and talking. So just like I said, just talking game with everybody was cool.
That's funny that you mentioned Boogie Basham because I feel like you guys are very similar in terms of your skill sets, the way you play. You know, you mentioned violence. You know, that's what I see in Boogie Basham as well.
Yeah, he's a great player. He's a really good player.
That's exciting, man. Not a couple of years ago, last summer, Justin Herbert talked about, you know, at the combine, there were some teams that would ask him some weird questions. You know, someone asked him, you know, there were 4 or 5 coaches in the room and he's like, which one of us would you punch in the face if you had to choose? Did you get any weird questions like that this week during the interview or that week during the interviews?
I got a few. I got somebody was talking about. I follow a lot of Instagram models. Supposedly, like I was like, all right, like what does that even mean? Like I appreciate like good looking people. Like what does that mean? I got that one. I got like what's the first thing I do in the morning? There's some weird stuff in there, but yeah, I think the model one was the most outlandish, probably.
That's hilarious, man.
Nah, I mean, you get some weird ones though. There's some wild ones out there.
Yeah, Justin was telling that story on the Pat McAfee show last year after he got drafted, and you know, of course, everybody was eating up. It was hilarious. But social media habits, man, I think that's a new one. I haven't heard of that one before.
Yep, that's what I got.
That's funny, man. So in terms of maybe a team that stood out to you, or do you feel like you would fit better in a certain scheme, I guess is what, you know, I've kind of been asking these prospects. Do you think that, you know, like the Chargers are playing a 3-4 scheme, like could you play outside linebacker or would you have a preference of playing 4-3 defensive end?
I mean, I'm comfortable with either. I played a 3-4 DN. I played a 4-3 DN. I played inside, so I think I'm athletic enough and quick enough to play outside backer. And, you know, I'm long enough to put on weight and, you know, just stay at 270 and play on the edge. So, I mean, I'm comfortable either way. I think that's what's so good about me is that I can fit just about any scheme. So, I mean, I just got to learn it. I think I could be successful in wherever I've been placed.
That's awesome, man. I think that is really true for you. You know, there's just, I think 70 days until the draft. So what are some things that you're trying to work on until that day comes that, you know, you could potentially hear your name called?
I just keep working on the stuff that I've been working on from, you know, junior year to senior year. Just keep working on flexibility, keep working on, you know, knowledge, learning the game, learning about the game, and just keep developing moves. I think that's all you can really do. Just keep training.
Yeah, all about putting in that work, right? And we're working on those things, you know. Peyton, thanks so much for your time, man. I'm never going to forget the Instagram model thing. That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's wild. You have me though.
Yeah, man, of course. Keep training, man, and hopefully you stay safe with all the crazy storms. Although I heard it's kind of passing now. So
Yeah.
stay safe, man, and stay healthy.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. So Tyler, you had the chance to watch some of Peyton Turner's film this weekend. And so what were your thoughts on Peyton Turner? And what were kind of your reactions to watching his film on tape this weekend?
You kind of gave me a bit of a preview when I think I said I loved Patrick Jones' effort. And then you said, okay, well, you're really going to like Peyton Turner. And from the moment you turn on the film, I was only able to watch his game versus BYU, which TDN and PFF has as his worst game. If that's his worst game, then we're in for a treat because he was flying everywhere. Probably the most high motor, high effort guy that I've watched in the draft so far. It tells me a lot when if the running back, if you're on the the left side and the running back goes the other way and he's 40 yards downfield, if you're a 6 whatever he is, 200 something pound defensive lineman running down the field 40 yards just to catch that guy, that tells me so much about you. And one of the things that I think makes some of the best guys on the Chargers so successful, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, is that effort, that hustle, that motor. Kenneth Murray, I love how much he hustles every single play, and the fact that he's able to play the most snaps of anybody on defense and still show that is incredible. And that's why he's going to be so successful in the NFL. Joey Bosa, no one has a higher motor than Joey Bosa every single play. The guy who's going to be your closer, your sealer at the end of games. Uchenna Nwosu, that's one of the few things that I liked about him coming out of college. High motor guy. It showed in the preseason. So Peyton Turner, just based on what I've seen and watched so far, high motor, a little tall. I started to watch some of the Senior Bowl reps. Sometimes he's just a little bit too high, doesn't have that bend to get around on the outside sometimes. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a bit of an adjustment for him. But if you're able to work on that or whatever it takes, he could be pretty good. So him in like the second round, definitely in the third round, would be a pretty good haul.
I would agree with that too.
I was just gonna say, he's a 2-star recruit that had to kind of grind to where he is. And that's kind of what's impressive about him, and that's what shows up on tape.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I talked with him about, his experience at Houston. And when he was this year, they did run a more traditional defense, but in previous years, they ran that 3-3-5 bull crap that is so, all over the place in college football now. And so when you run that kind of defense as a defensive end, you get like no sacks because you're double teamed on every single play. Like it's just, the whole point is dropping 8 in coverage every single time. And so I think that's kind of, where that motor comes from, because he knew like, okay, like I'm not going to get sacks. Like I have to be able to go and chase down runners in order to make plays and really impact the game and get my name out there. So, he talked about his injury history too. And so he was really candid about everything. And the question about the Instagram models, man, that was hilarious. I could not believe somebody asked him that. But I think he's going to be a fun player. And I think he's someone that you take, in the late second, early third, and you're at least going to get a high level worker and somebody that is going to outproduce, his draft selection just because he's going to work so hard. So there's definitely a lot of physical upside there. His arms are so long. And he talked about that too, is that his favorite thing to do is just, one long arm somebody and then be able to react off of that. So great length, great size, great effort. And I think he's going to be a very solid starter in the NFL.
I completely agree. And the things that I think the stats are there, very short amount of games, obviously, because they played 4 games this year.
Yeah.
But the things that don't show up on the stats where he just blows up a tackle, and the play goes the other way. But if the play went his way, he would have blown that up and got a tackle for loss. So, and everything that he puts into if you watch the tape, I think you'll like him even more than the stats. So if you guys give him a chance, I think you're really going to like him.
For sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So let's talk about this free agent. So I'm going to share my screen right now to OverTheCap. Obviously with OverTheCap and Spot Track, you'll have a little bit of differences. Goodness sake. So right now the main difference between the two is that OverTheCap has the Chargers with $23 million in cap space. Spot Track has it closer to 30. Alex pointed this out. OverTheCap has 5 players on the roster that Spot Track does not, right? Is that right, Alex?
Yeah, I think Spot Track is 45 and OverTheCap is 48. So that might be the difference of like a couple of the like minimum guys who are making like between 660 and 1 million. Or it could also just be the difference of a couple million when we're talking about some of the bigger contracts, because I think they had one of them had Trey Turner at 11 and one of them had Trey Turner at 11.5. So it could be really like small stuff like that too, I think.
Yeah. So we'll have a conversation about all these guys. We're going to talk about potential cuts first. Just keep in mind that most people are projecting the Chargers to have around 30 million. So just a little difference there. And each website offers you different things, right? Spot Track offers you an insight into the potential market value of certain free agents. Not everyone. I wish they would do everyone, but so we're going to talk about some of those. So let's start with potential cuts. Obviously, the Chargers do not have to cut anyone. I think they're probably going to, just because they're going to want to be able to be aggressive in certain areas of free agency. So let's start with the obvious one in Trey Turner, right? And so I think all three of us are in favor of cutting Trey Turner.
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your guys' mouth, but are we cutting Trey Turner first?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the easy one. We talked about him earlier, and I don't really feel like beating a dead horse. It makes too much sense to cut him. And you see right away, it goes from 23 to $35 million in cap space. And that's just one cut. And the Chargers could take that same money and give it to Hunter Henry. And then there's your extension. So let's talk about Casey Hayward. Alex, you kind of talked about this a few weeks ago. What are your pros and cons of cutting Casey Hayward?
I think if you want to start with the cons is, he has a lot of familiarity with this Chargers team. He's been kind of a vocal leader for a while on that defense, over 5 or 6 years now. But I do think the cons of it are, he is coming off of a season where he had a lot of injuries. He is 32 years old, and he's not going to be able to keep up with guys that have a lot of speed or physicality on the outside. I mean, that's what we saw last year. For me, I would vote cut, just because, with the Staley system, I think you kind of need to start fresh when we're talking about a guy like Hayward. You already have two 32-year-old corners, and, when we talk about Chris Harris, that's a guy who can at least go on the inside and play slot, versus, Casey Hayward hasn't played slot in 6 years. So that's, an important thing there. But I think it's not a great, situation. I definitely am not enthusiastic about cutting Casey Hayward in the same way that I might be about Trey Turner, just because Casey's been here longer and he's been a leader. But to me, I don't think you can go into next year with him as your CB1 playing kind of a Staley type 3-4. It may be different if Anthony Lynn was still here and they were still running Gus Bradley kind of stuff. But I just think the new scheme, his age and injuries all create some complications.
Yeah, Staley coming in certainly throws a monkey wrench in him sticking around. I think, if, like you said, if Lynn were back, Hayward probably sticks around. And, he does deserve to stick around in a way because of all the previous production and how good he was before. But with Staley coming in, I just think they want someone different, someone more athletic. And I don't think that's Hayward. It's never been Hayward. Also, I think you can get enough figured out in the slot. Even if Harris isn't quite working out in the slot, you could move him to outside, I guess. But you could, in the slot, they're not cutting Harris anyway. But since they aren't, they have Harris. They could work Adderley in the slot. I do think there's a safety they could bring in that played 230 slot corner reps last season. So I think that can kind of get figured out. So I don't think, if Davis comes back, at least, I gotta cut Hayward. It sucks, and I'm sure he'll go somewhere and have a pretty decent season, but it's just not with this team right now.
Yeah, I think if the Chargers do cut him, I think him signing in Las Vegas is a no-brainer. Like, you can sign that right now. So it just kind of sucks to see him go. One of my favorite players in Chargers history, and it's just, at the end of the day, it's a business. And you look at this cap number right here, 11.75, and the dead cap is only $2 million. So we're gonna, just for this exercise, we're not saying that the Chargers are going to do this. It's just a possibility. So we'll cut Casey Hayward, and then 35 becomes 45. And that's a huge chunk of change. And that's just making 2 cuts. Like, so we'll get into the next one. Michael Peterson brought this up, and that's Linval Joseph. He had a good season last year. He was definitely better than what they had previously experienced with Brandon Mebane. I know that the sack numbers were not there, but you know, he was the third lead. He was third on the Chargers in pressures, and you know, he's you know, a defensive tackle that's above 30, and that's just kind of not something that you usually see. I think that next year, you know, he could have another good season. He could have a bounce back season in terms of sacks, continue to put up those kind of pressures. You know, he also could be someone that is a prime candidate of injuries, right? Because he is an older player, and you know, playing the nose tackle instead of defensive tackle, it's a little different in terms of, you know, production. So I think Linval Joseph, he could have a good season. He could have a bad season. He could have a season where he's injured a lot. The cap number for Linval Joseph is 11.9, and you know, the dead cap is only $4 million. So what do you guys make about cutting Linval Joseph? Tyler, we'll start with you on this one.
You have to extend him, and that's a lot of money to free up if you do cut him. But you got nobody else on the roster who's going to do his role, and you're not taking a guy like him until, you know, maybe like Shelvin in the third round. And do you want to, you know, you might be getting a rookie edge and a rookie outside linebacker. You could get, you know, a rookie nose tackle in there too. I just don't know if it's going to be expensive, but you have to extend him. I don't think you can cut him. But I think you definitely have to extend him and try to lower that. Just give him that extra year, lower it this year, and figure it out at the end. You know, draft someone like a Shelvin and figure it out in 2022. But this year, you just got to keep him. If I had to pick between keeping Hayward and Joseph based on their contracts, I would probably just keep Joseph, because I don't think there's a good way you can replace him right now.
Yeah, I think Joseph is the tougher one to replace, just because it's not a great free agent DT class, and nor, you know, it's a decent draft class, but I don't know if the Chargers are going to leap into the second or third round and go defensive tackle. They may wait on that.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jerry Tillery and Justin Jones are not prepared to take over for Linval Joseph, even if you combine the two of them. So it's just... it's, you know, I get that the cap number is big, but unlike with Casey Hayward, I just think Linval Joseph was still really good last year. He has enough production to warrant coming back on this team, and as like Tyler said, you can extend him for a year and then figure it out in terms of the cap hit. I just think he's too valuable to cut unless you really have like a great backup option, and like, you know, you go down the list of the free agent class, and the biggest one is like Ndamukong Suh, who's 34 years old, right? Or somebody like that. You know, there are interesting depth guys, but in terms of starters, I really just don't think you're going to do much better than Joseph. And frankly, like, the scheme doesn't change that much for him. Like when we're talking about comparing him or his role with Hayward's, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be doing the same stuff he's always been doing, potentially with more help with defensive line around him. I just think they have to keep him, and they do not have a viable replacement at this time. So, you know, extend it. You know, there are ways you could restructure it and lower that cap hit, but I think at the end of the day, you got to keep him.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we're all on the same page. So I think over the cap here can let me work an extension in.
Go up, or usually there's a little side thing that comes up.
You hit submit.
There we go. Okay.
There you go.
So we'll add 1 year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I've looked at this before, and I have no idea how to do the math on this one.
Okay, I'm trying to get the cap number down for next year, or down for this year.
What if we make it like 4.5 million
for this year?
I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but
that works. We'll make it 6 million for this year and 11 million for next year.
Yeah.
Extend.
All right. Oh.
Player must be a paid veteran minimum base salary each. Okay.
Okay, so then I think you could change the roster bonus then. I don't know.
Well, it's only taking me up to 7.075, which I'm
okay.
So that freed up $4 million in cap space
Yeah.
by doing a 1-year extension for Linval Joseph, which I think is plenty.
Right. Yeah. It's just small things like that add up over time. So, you know, if you save 4 million here, save 4 million there, it ends up being a significant amount.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't think it's going to happen. I've said a bunch of times, I think Mike Williams is going to play on his 5th-year option, and then they'll figure it out later. But I just want to see what happens when we do work an extension in for Mike Williams. So what do you guys think a fair value for Mike Williams is? I know like Corey Davis's projected market value is like 4 for $38 million, I believe. What do you guys think?
I
about
think
Mike
you
Williams?
could do 3 for 33.
Okay.
I think that's the fairest value you're going to get, you know, and I know that's going to be like, yeah, you're paying him $10 million a year. I think he's going to end up playing under that franchise tag, like we said. But to me, like 3 years 30 or 3 years 33 is probably what you're offering him. It's just a matter at that point of, you know, does he want to bet on himself for this year, or does he want that long-term security?
I'm personally just letting him play this year out and pretending like it's a franchise tag, an expensive franchise tag.
Yeah.
And then just let him see what happens later.
I agree with that.
I agree with that. I just want to see, like, visualize how this would work. So, you know, taking out the option essentially and then extending him would free up $4 million at that same kind of price tag. So something to consider, and I'm sure the Chargers will consider that as well. Anyone else you guys want to talk about in terms of potentially cutting? Because we already talked about Chris Harris and how Chris Harris is not going to be cut. Anyone else that you want to mention here?
Yeah, there's not really many other guys. I guess Chris Harris was the one we were kind of debating for a while, but Chris Harris, you know, they got Ronaldo Hill and have made it a very Chris Harris friendly system. They've talked a lot about how much they kind of will like Chris Harris going into next year. I don't think that's happening. And then the one people might point to is Brian Bulaga, but as you can see in that 14 million in dead cap value, it's not great.
No, not at all. that would be a tough one to swallow.
I'll be right back. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, so I wouldn't. This is pretty much it for me. Unless you want to nickel and dime your way through the rest of it and get it to, you know, 50 million in cap, because we're at like 49.7, and that's kind of irritating. 49.876. I guess you could cut somebody.
It's not a round number for sure.
Yeah, that's really irritating.
But we, you know, like I said earlier, you know, this over the cap does have, you know, the $7 million less. So this would be like 56, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's a great chunk of change, man. You know, freeing up $56 million by just cutting Casey Hayward, Trey Turner, and working in that extension for Linval Joseph. I think, you know, that's a no-brainer. And $56 million in cap space, you know, that gets you a lot. That gets you in the conversation for a lot of good free agents. So next, I think the first order of business after this, and it's something that the Chargers could do as soon as, you know, we're recording this on Sunday. As soon as tomorrow for you guys, the Chargers could come to an agreement, or not really come to an agreement. They could slap the franchise tag on Hunter Henry. I think he's the only candidate that would make sense for. And so I want to do that just to see what it looks like. So we'll franchise tag Hunter Henry, and that would takes it from, sorry, what was it at before? 49 million.
49.8.
Yeah, 49.8. You franchise tag Hunter Henry, and it takes it to 39.7. And the franchise tag number, is that right? The 10.16 isn't that what it is this year?
No, it was 10.6 this year. So it was about 500K higher than that. But so the thing with Hunter Henry is just like you have to, it's probably going to go up a little bit. They haven't decided all of the franchise tag values. So I would guess that in reality, Hunter Henry's cap, if it's a franchise tag, is probably going to be closer to around 11 or 12. Because it's going to go up a little bit just based on salaries going up, right? So I think that last year was 10.6. I'm going to guess it's going to be closer to 11.
Yeah. And I'm pretty, like, it has to go up for doing it a second time in a row. Like, it doesn't, it wouldn't get lower. So that one doesn't make sense to me. Okay. So let's talk about Hunter Henry. Alex did a great video on our YouTube channel about the Chargers options with Hunter Henry. So Tyler, I'll ask you this first. What do you think happens with Hunter Henry? What do you think should happen with Hunter Henry?
Will happen, extend him, should happen, extend him. I think it's a no-brainer. I think it helps the line. I think it helps obviously the tight end group. It helps Justin Herbert, the rest of the offense. I don't think there's any reason to not do it other than injuries, but he played a full healthy year technically. So I'm cool with it. Extend him.
Yeah, no, I think you should extend Hunter Henry. It's also just less risky than doing the franchise tag, because if you do the franchise tag again, you have no control over Hunter Henry the next year if you can't reach a deal by that July deadline.
Yeah.
So I think it's just smarter to get it done now, and figure out the rest later. I know people will be like, Hunter Henry hasn't exploded onto the scene, right? There's no Pro Bowl appearance, or there's not a beastly season from him, but I do think we were asking him to do two things, as I said, kind of a bunch of times, but we were asking him to stay healthy and we were asking him to block better, and he did both of those things in 2020, even though it wasn't amazing numbers, and his numbers would have been better if he didn't miss 2 games because of COVID, unfortunately. So he would have broken all of his personal records, I believe, in terms of yards at least. So I would extend Hunter Henry. Like I said in the video, I think if Hunter Henry wants to move on, then someone like Zach Ertz makes a lot of sense. But for the time being, I just think it's very Chargers to take care of your own guys and keep developing them. Hunter Henry is also 4 years younger than Zach Ertz. So I would just, sign him to that 4-year extension.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we've talked about, like, the Chargers don't really have a good option. I know the Zach Ertz thing has come out since we previously talked about this, and that is easily the best option, the best alternative in my opinion. But, say Zach Ertz, say like the Seahawks trade for Zach Ertz, then the Chargers are stuck. They don't have any other quality options, right? Like maybe a Cameron Brate gets cut, but is that even really much better? Like, they don't really have a choice here. Maybe because of the cap going down, and maybe because of his familiarity with the team, maybe they could get a little bit of a cheaper deal out of Hunter Henry, but I agree. I just don't think that they have a choice.
I've seen a couple people talk about Donald Parham, and while I do think he's a good second option for them, it's just not super realistic to rely on him. I watched a couple of games of his, and he did improve as a blocker, I think. And I think that's good moving forward. You don't have to sign Green again if you sign Parham, but asking him to run routes and be like Hunter Henry is just not realistic right now. There were some moments on tape where he had a little bit of a twitch, but otherwise he's just kind of just like a lumber this on a drag, or kind of go this way and turn around. He's just not a great receiving option yet. More of like a gadget, 20, 25 catches kind of guy.
Oh, hello.
19 million cap.
Whoops.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair if we're doing this contract to say, 10 to 12 million a year. That's kind of where Hunter Henry ends up falling, I think. So I think that's a decent, and the thing about the contract structure is it's going to be a little bit different, right? There's a lot of GMs that can front load the contract. There's a lot of GMs that, if they're working on this Hunter Henry extension, maybe give him a lot more money and signing bonus up front. In terms of the guarantees, right? So I think that's the important thing. It's not just going to be like, oh, he's getting this value this year, this value this year, right? But that's how we use it in OverTheCap and Spot Track. So
yeah, and OverTheCap, it's pretty straightforward, right? It increases slightly every single year, and this would equal the kind of contract that I think makes a lot of sense for him. So we'll extend Hunter Henry. They're now back to similar with the franchise tag, 39.8. Well, actually, this would be 45 because the difference is in cap numbers. Okay, let's talk about Michael Davis next. I think he would be the next up on the list, and that is his evaluation. I think it's not on Spot Track. It's a little tougher for for us to kind of figure it out. The Draft Network predicts that he's only worth $5 million, which I think is a no-brainer. Like, if that's the case, then he's not going anywhere. But Daniel Popper did suggest a 3-year, $27 million contract for Michael Davis, and I think that would make some sense. $9 million per year would be a little rich for my liking. What do you guys think about Michael Davis?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be $5 million. I think it's going to be closer, definitely, to 7 or 8. just because I think teams really value speed on the outside. I think teams value, especially a guy who's young and can get after it right on the outside. There's not a lot of those guys around in the league at that age that are readily available for someone to go get. So I think that's why Michael Davis would cost somewhere between 7 million and 9 billion, kind of like Popper said. But I still think even if that's the price, you go for it, especially because in this simulation, we cut Casey Hayward. You need a quarterback. You don't have any more quarterbacks other than, if you want to start Tavon Campbell at outside corner. So I think, Michael Davis becomes a must resign. I think he's a must resign if you're keeping Hayward anyway. But since we freed up that money from Hayward, now we kind of have the money to just pay off the Michael Davis deal.
And that works for me. Davis played better than Hayward last year overall. I think he improved so much. I think possibly the most improved player on the team last season. And corners, elite corners, not that Davis is an elite corner, but elite corners are really expensive. Davis has continued to improve. If he takes another step next season, then the contract is totally worth it. 3 years for 27 million. You'll take that. You got another 2 years of potentially elite corner play. I'll take it.
Yeah, and I think there will be some kind of projecting, right? Because he has continued to progress. He's got all the physical traits that the Chargers are looking for in either scheme, right? Like he's somebody that the Chargers would be extending regardless of Anthony Lynn being the coach or Brandon Staley being the coach, because he fits any scheme really. And that is the one thing that I know everybody. I don't want to talk bad or good about Gus Bradley because he's not on the Chargers anymore, but they let him play more man-to-man coverage last year, and I think Michael Davis was able to thrive because of it. And we've talked about this. He was on Stephon Diggs most of that game, and he did a fantastic job. And he's one of the only players in the league that can keep up and do a good job against Tyreek Hill too. So I just think his value, he's a must resign, and you can't let a cornerback who's finally coming into his own leave and go elsewhere. It's not the Tom Telesco way. It's not the Chargers way. And it's just in general not a smart way to build an NFL football team. Like, you got to keep your own guys that are taking those steps, and you got to keep them around and keep developing them. So we'll do like 3 for 24.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
I think that's a good balance between what Popper was suggesting and what the other people are suggesting. So we'll just do an even. We'll do 7 for the first year, and then we'll work up. Just make it nice and easy.
This is going to be really entertaining for people listening on podcasts.
I was thinking the same thing.
Watching, hearing Steven click-clacking on the computer.
Sorry, guys.
All right, Alex, got to tell a joke then.
I don't have any.
Okay, so that takes it from, oh gosh, math is hard. $45 million in cap space to 38. Is that right?
Yeah.
38, 39?
For sure.
Something like that. Okay, so those are the first two ones. I think we're all on the same page that Melvin Ingram can go bye-bye and not be any. I don't know why that was so funny. I don't know why I said that, but yeah, Melvin Ingram is not being re-signed. Are we all in agreement there?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think Melvin Ingram should be re-signed. I don't think it's like 100% he won't be re-signed. I think there may be a type of deal where they get him for like a 1 year type extension and a prove it deal, maybe to re-enter next free agency with a better season and a better just, he had 0 sacks this year. Right? Yeah. Like that's kind of what we're talking about and why we're not talking about re-signing him, because going into this year, I think we said it last episode, it was like a real competition, like who's going to get re-signed, Melvin Ingram or Hunter Henry, right? If we want to dole out that money. And Melvin Ingram just had a bad year, and it was unfortunate for him because of the injuries, but I don't think you could afford to sign him to like a 3-year extension or something like that. I think the most possible thing, if they wanted to re-sign him, was like a 1 year prove it deal that sets him up for free agency next year, maybe, so he could kind of bounce back, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think the 1 year deal is certainly possible. I do think, there are some pieces to say that, he could stick around, A, being cheaper, B, the Chargers just might need to hang on to him for another year because they have to go offensive line, corner, receiver, whatever. And then also Gift Smith did stick around. And so there's some familiarity there. He might go to bat for him, but otherwise I do think he's gone.
Yeah, it's a very similar conversation to Trey Turner, right? Like, it's most likely that Melvin Ingram is not as bad as he was this year. Like, there's no scenario where he goes out next year and again gets 0 sacks, in my opinion. Like, the odds are just not in favor of that happening. And so could he bounce back? Could he be, a 5, 6, 7 sack guy next year, and be around the same kind of tackles for loss efforts? Sure. I'm just not paying him the kind of money that it requires. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. So, we could mess around with some of the other guys here. Mike Pouncey still is on here, even though he retired. Denzel Perryman, Tyrod Taylor, those are kind of the next ones. But let's talk about some free agents here. So I think the biggest name that has been mentioned among Chargers Nation and the Bolt family and all that is Joe Thuney. And I think Joe Thuney is a fantastic player, but this is kind of why I wanted to show this, because Joe Thuney's contract, his market value is 5 years and $70 million, according to Spot Track. And it's the same thing for Brandon Scherf. So, we're looking at the Chargers cap space right now. They have 32, 93, 143, 189, 230 over the next 5 years. Adding just Joe Thuney to those numbers, it's going to be massive value for what the Chargers are looking at. And so his yearly average would be $14 million per year. Sorry again for the audio, listening to me type away clacking away on my computer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe Thuney is definitely like the biggest possible offensive line investment. I guess maybe unless Trent Williams was really available. But I think the Niners are going to re-sign him pretty quick. Thuney is the biggest possible addition, and I know people will be skeptical about big offensive line additions, given what happened last year with Trey Turner and Brian Bulaga. But I think the difference with Thuney and those signings from last year is just Thuney's younger, and he has less mileage on him. Played fantastic last year. I just think he's such an upgrade over what the Chargers have now in Feeney and Lamp. That it's, for me, even though it's a lot of money, I would honestly vote yay on this one.
I'm going to vote no because of that contract, and because I do believe you can play Moneyball a little bit and sign some other guys to make up the combination that works. If they were only 1 or 2 holes away from a good offensive line, perhaps. But the fact that they probably need 4 plus 2 backups means I'm going to go a couple of different areas.
Steven's the tiebreaker.
Yeah, Steven already tweeted this, so I know what he's picking.
I'm going to vote no on this one too, just because, like Tyler said, right? If Dan Feeney had taken like that step of development that we all were hoping for and that we all thought was happening and after the first 3 or 4 games, then I would be in favor of this. But they like cutting Trey Turner means you have to upgrade both guard spots, in my opinion. And, sure, you could draft one, but teams don't want to pigeonhole themselves into having to draft need in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. They want to be able to take the best players available. And so, signing a Joe Thuney makes a lot of sense. He's a great player, and he absolutely fills a position of need. I just think he's too expensive, man. When you could take this $14 million and sign 2 starting level guards instead of 1, I think makes a lot of sense. But I'm going to extend him, and then I'll undo it just to see the numbers. So that goes from 32 to 18, and obviously the next few years, it's just a huge contract. And guards are becoming more valuable, and especially with the way that they're playing. But $14 million for a guard it's just so much money for one position that's not a tackle, a quarterback, a receiver, a corner, an edge rusher. So the money just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I would go for it because it's not my money that I'm spending. But the Chargers might be a little more conservative, like you said, and say, hey, let's try to get 2 linemen for the price of 1 really expensive one. So I think that's totally fair.
And I don't know if we'll ever get to this guy, but the guy I was considering, well, there's a couple of guys, and I'm sure we'll get to a certain Packer, but I was thinking Feliciano, who played 3 different positions for the Bills last season. I think that just helps you when you are trying to draft It's kind of the reason I thought they would keep Dan Feeney, and they still might, is because you could put him at guard or center. Feliciano, you could put him at left guard, center, or right guard. And so, whatever happens in the draft, you can just kick him the other way. And I don't think the money's all that different. It's not like a guard versus a tackle or left tackle where you're paying someone, big difference, or ahead of time you need to know if they're a left tackle or guard. For him, just plug him along the interior, and he's not bad. It's not great, but again, it's money ball. Only had 23 pressures last year, and we'll take that. Like a marginal improvement over what they're used to is a big improvement for this team.
Yeah, and that versatility for me, like that's something that I've thought a lot about for this team, is just being able to get 5 talented players and be able to figure out the positions later. And in this kind of instance, we can talk about Corey Linsley and John Feliciano being the 2 targets here. And I think, if you get the 2 of them for a combined $15 million, that's a steal. And then you can keep Dan Feeney if you want and play him at guard, or you can keep Forrest Lamp and play him at guard. Then you can draft a guard in the later rounds and provide some competition. And it's the same reason why, Rashawn Slater and Elijah Vera Tucker make a lot of sense at 13, just because the Chargers really do need a talent upgrade at every spot. And you can just, you take a talented player and then you figure it out later. And so I think Feliciano would be a good place to start here. I think on Spot Track, his value is 3 for 24, if I'm not mistaken.
It's $8 million. Mm-hmm.
So I think, $8 million for a starting, left guard, center, right guard. He played all 3 for the Bills last year. And so I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the deal. I'm sure Tyler is too. It's more smart money, I guess. He's a pretty easy plug and play replacement for Trey Turner. And I think he's at a stage in his career where he's just playing better.
Okay, so this is going to take us from, just kind of front loading or back loading the contract, excuse me. It will help the Chargers make some space. So let's talk about Linsley next. I think Linsley is most likely going to stay in Green Bay, but they have so many free agents that they've got to pay, right? Like, if they're choosing between Corey Linsley and Aaron Jones, like how are they going to choose between that? Or, I forget the tight end's name.
Tanyan,
yeah, who had a career breakout season last year and should have been a Pro Bowler. How are they going to make those kind of decisions? Do you choose a weapon for Aaron Rodgers because Lord knows he needs more weapons? Or do you choose to keep the offensive line, which was, until David Bakhtiari got hurt, it was the best line in the league in every single metric. So, they're going to have some decisions to make. I would assume that Linsley stays, but if he's available, I think it's a no-brainer sign for the Chargers. And, you get to pair him back with Brian Bulaga.
Yeah, I think his Spot Track value was about 9 or 10 million, which is obviously he's kind of a center. That's a little bit more affordable than Linsley if you're paying prime at that position. And this team is letting Pouncey walk, or Pouncey retired, I should say. So then, you can use basically Pouncey's 9 million cap hit plus a little bit extra to go get Corey Linsley or someone like that.
This is a no-brainer for me. First of all, 10 million a year for an all-pro guy. Give me that I don't care what it is. Blank check for me with Lindsey. As a half sort of kind of Raiders fan, please don't log off. I've watched the Raiders take Hudson, sign him in free agency, and that line has been good since that move 4 or 5 whatever years ago. It makes such a difference to have someone like Hudson over Feeney, and now you have Linsley coming into the picture, who also only allowed 4 pressures last season, and he's only worth 10 million. I mean, come on. I think he'll be worth a little bit more than that, but I think this is a no-brainer. I'd rather overpay for him than anybody else in this free agent class.
Thanks for making my half Eagles phantom look much better, Tyler.
Hey, well, no one has to worry about me. I'm 100% Chargers, man. So, I think this makes so much sense to get the center where it's supposed to be. And Dan Feeney, he, in theory, he could be a serviceable center next year. And I think he's a better center than a guard personally. I just think as a guard, his lack of functional strength is a bit more exposed. But in this kind of instance where you're having him next to Corey Linsley, I think that helps tremendously. And, you saw what kind of happened with him when he was next to Mike Pouncey. So this makes a lot of sense to me. Sorry, I'm gonna turn off my notifications. Should have done this beforehand.
The other thing I would say is like people will be like, oh, well, you're signing all these offensive linemen. How does that work under the cap? And we can kind of get into it with the cap room we have left. But also, next year in 2022, Brian Balaga, instead of being 14 million in cap, he's 14 million in cap with 3 million dead cap, right? So then you can kind of game the system there and be like, well, we may save 11 million next year by cutting Balaga. So then that kind of opens the door to all these possibilities. And I'm sure Telesco has thought close to that far in the future anyway.
Yeah, and I don't know how the dead cap works for Brian Balaga next year, but they could easily have him come off the books next year.
Yeah, it's about 3 million in dead cap with 14 in salary, so that they save 11 million.
Yeah, and in this instance too, like Linval Josephs would be much cheaper next year. Chris Harris will be cheaper next year. And Mike Williams, we'll see. I would imagine that Mike Williams is not $15 million next year. But we'll have to see there. So, signing Corey Linsley, I think, is a no-brainer. I think if the Chargers wanted to go a cheaper route, I would be in favor of signing a Larry Warford or a Denzel Good. Warford's not in this list. I don't know why he's not on Over the Cap, but Denzel Good is, and I think Denzel Good would probably cost you like $6 million maybe, in that range. So let's move on to the next one, which I think is kind of the other big one. I think at this point, after signing Feliciano and Linsley, it might be a bit of a reach, but that is Leonard Floyd, the pass rusher from the Rams, who's been with Staley for a while. So if you can see my notes right here, his spot track market value is 4 years, $52 million. So that's a bit of a reach, but what do you guys make about signing Leonard Floyd at this point with Henry Davis, Feliciano, and Linsley already on the roster?
See, this is one of those things where Telesco's smarter than us, because we were just going, hey, we'll sign that guy, and now we're close to out of money. So, that's what happens. But I think Leonard Floyd would be a good signing. I mean, maybe Leonard Floyd, means that, in this scenario, we could take Feliciano out and then put Leonard Floyd in, depending on, kind of what you want to do. And then that kind of makes up the money. But I think Leonard Floyd makes a lot of sense. I don't know if he's going to get 13 million, but he's certainly going to be in that 10 to 13 million per range. I think he's probably like my favorite potential like outside linebacker defensive end type to get if they really want that edge to replace Melvin Ingram through free agency. So yeah, again, this is not my money, so I would do it. But, I just think because we've signed Linsley and because we've signed Feliciano, this move becomes a little bit harder to make.
And that's fine. I'm going to say no. I think I keep drumming up the idea that for some reason the Chargers are now going to take an edge guy in the second round. I don't know why. I just feel like after I keep watching different edge guys, and granted they are different. They're not just all outside linebackers, not just all, 3-4 defensive ends, but I don't know. I just keep leaning towards the fact that like maybe they'll find a guy in the second round that they can take and that someone will get bumped to that second round that they could get. I also think the money's a little bit complicated, and I do prefer a different Rams free agent over Floyd right now, because I think that would help with the transition of this defense more than anything.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And, signing him right now to a $13 million cap hit, that doesn't even leave the Chargers with enough space to sign their draft class, because they do have 9 picks to draft and sign. So we'll have to see about that one. I can't imagine that in this instance that they would sign it. But then again, like we said earlier, Telesco is a much smarter person, and Ed McGuire knows how to work this cap really well. So maybe they move on into a different direction. So let's move on to that other Rams free agent, which is John Johnson. Everyone knows, like, at least me and Tyler, we're in favor of this. So Alex, I'll let you start this off. What do you make about signing John Johnson at this point?
I think it makes sense. It gives you a upgrade over, obviously, Nasir Adderley and Rayshon Jenkins, and you pair him with Derwin James. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's possible that they go after John Johnson and make a pursuit of him. I just wonder where that leaves someone like Nasir Adderley, who is, still kind of developing. So I don't know if they'll totally go for that or if they want to go with Derwin and this year, next year. Rayshawn is also still kind of in the mix, depending on what they want to do with him. He's another free agent that we didn't talk about that's pending. I think John Johnson makes a lot of sense if they want to do it. It probably means, definitely means you're not bringing Rayshawn back at, a $5 million cap hit or something like that. The only reason that I question it is because I still think they do have a lot of belief in Adderley eventually developing. I don't think they've completely given up on him yet, but I would totally be in favor of going after John Johnson.
I just have a feeling that Staley doesn't really care about Adderley like all that much. Like there's no reason for him to.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's possible. I just think, if Benjamin Solak was kind of talking about this, but you could put Adderley deep and kind of use him better than the last coaching staff did. I still think there is a lot of raw athleticism and talent there that just, needs to be conditioned better. I mean, he was a second round pick that, a lot of us at the time were arguing should have gone at the end of the first round when they picked Jerry Tillery. Yeah. So I just think, I think Staley is still going to value Nasir Adderley. Obviously, he probably wants his guy, John Johnson, over him. But I just wonder how that plays into things.
I mean, there's certainly a role for him. He's going to look in the same way that John Johnson played, 408 box snaps, 230 slot corner snaps, 353 safety snaps, 32 defensive line snaps. Not that Adderley's going to play defensive line, but you can move these guys around, and I think that's just what Staley's going to do. At the end of the day, Johnson for me is so cheap and helps his defense so much by being the guy who's probably going to call plays, which we already saw freed up Kenneth Murray in the Jets game, I believe. And so, you take a guy who's the fourth best tackling efficiency among starting safeties, plug that in, a guy you can move anywhere, reliable tackler, and command your defense, and just let the guys go play, let Murray go blitz, let James do his thing, Bosa, whatever. And for 5 years, 8.3, I think is what it is at Spot Rack. I just don't think you can pass that up.
Yeah, the play calling thing is an interesting part of it because, do they want Kenneth Murray to be the quarterback of the defense? Do they want Derwin James to be the quarterback of the defense? I think that's an interesting part of the John Johnson signing as well.
Yeah, it would be. And like I've said before, this signing John Johnson gives you the best possible insurance policy in case Derwin James is not able to ditch the injury bug. I think he's going to.
Right.
I think that, he's too athletic and he's too freaky of an athlete to, continue to be injured. But I just think, making a signing for John Johnson, it just makes so much sense to me. And, $8 million, it's not, I think that would put him at like the 7th or 8th highest paid safety. So it's not like ridiculous, but it is a good contract for him.
Yeah.
And I think he deserves it. He's been a great player for the Rams, and I think he does deserve this kind of money. So sorry again if you're listening to the audio and listening to me type away, but we're just gonna get.
Yeah, the interesting thing that's interesting to me at least is, what if this team didn't let Adrian Phillips walk last year? Not saying Adrian Phillips is as good as John Johnson, but if you had him, there would certainly be less of a need to go out and I think grab that a safety at a premium price at least.
Yeah, so I accidentally added an extra zero, and it would have been an 85 million cap hit for him.
Now we're talking NBA money.
There we go. That's MLB money, man.
True.
So in this instance, the Chargers would have about $15 million left to sign, whoever else they wanted. And again, we could take out a John Feliciano or Corey Linsley and put in a Denzel Good, a Larry Warford, or somebody else, and the Chargers would be able to have, more money there. So guys, any other free agents? I've got a couple ones, but any free agents that you want to specifically talk about here?
None that immediately come to mind. I guess if you want to talk about, I don't know, which are there any other edge free agents that are kind of interesting to you outside of the Floyds and the Watts?
I mean,
sorry about that.
None that are cheap. I mean, they're all kind of expensive, or I would just take one in the draft.
Yeah. The only one that has piqued my interest, if they want to do, and again, this wouldn't even really factor into the salary cap because I think he would be so cheap, is because they're switching back to 3-4 and doing outside linebacker. I think Jerry Atachu would be pretty interesting. if they wanted to get him back. I think that would be kind of interesting signing. Obviously, I think he worked with Staley before in Denver. So I think that would be kind of an interesting signing.
No, that's a good call. I think that's.
But also, he makes like $2 million a year, so it wouldn't really factor into the cap.
Cheap, super cheap. So I think the other big one to talk about in terms of defensive signings would be Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams would be a monster cap hit, 5 for 56. But in terms of a 3-4 defensive end, he played 4-3 defensive tackle previously with the Jets, I believe, and then switched to 3-4 defensive end with the Giants this past year. And he had a huge season. And so the cap hit would be huge, but getting him back to LA, he's a USC kid, and pairing him with Joey Bosa instead of a Leonard Floyd or potentially a Von Miller as an inside rusher, I think on paper at least it would make a lot of sense. In terms of cap hit, that's a huge contract, man.
Right. And I think it's important to point out, even though we just said Leonard Williams is $11 million or so per year, and you might notice we only have $10 million left to work with. The cap is kind of, as some people say, the cap isn't real. And there are ways to work around it. You can go over the cap a little bit and figure it out, right? As you see, right? So we could give Leonard Williams $11 million this year. And let's say we give him 4 years for, I don't know, $44 million, something like that. But that would, kill our cap room this year. But then next year you would see that, we would have 50 or 55 million that would open up, right? Even with that signing. So, even though you take that, maybe you could dive into the red this year slightly, I still think that's kind of a signing that would be worth it, along with Leonard Floyd and some of the other guys that we've been talking about.
Yeah, if you're gonna not overpay. He had about 62 pressures last season, 13 sacks, 30 run stops. It's not like it's overpaying. You're gonna pay him whatever the hell he's due. But if I had to pick between Floyd and Williams, I'm taking Williams.
Yeah, that would be like the biggest splash, I think, and it'd be one that makes a lot of sense. It's gonna be interesting. The Giants can't afford him, but $56 million is no joke. So the other thing that's really interesting to me, I'm personally against this kind of decision-making process, but signing a left tackle that's not named Sam Tevi is an interesting thing for this team because, if you look at these spot track values, you have Alejandro Villanueva for 3 for 49. He is 32, but he's only played for 6 years in the NFL because of his Army service. So I'm not in favor of that, but it is interesting. Trent Williams, his market value is 3 for 54. Again, he's older. I'm just in favor of drafting a young player, but Cam Robinson is young. He's not like super good. He's probably almost on the same level of Sam Tevi, honestly, but his value is listed at 4 for 45. Taylor Moton, he would be really interesting in terms of a free agent tackle signing. He would be my choice, but you look at that 5-year, $73 million cap hit, and that's a lot of dough. So what do you guys make of potentially signing a left tackle for the Chargers this year?
Yeah, I'm kind of in line with your thinking where I don't think it's the best option. And if you're going to do any of those guys, my preference would just be maybe re-sign Sam Tevi to a kind of manageable deal and draft, your left tackle in round 1, hopefully. So that would be where I want to go. I think Villanueva becomes interesting, as I mentioned a couple times on the podcast, because, Surratt is now with the Chargers, who's been his offensive line coach for a while. So I think that's a move that the Chargers will look at. I want to say it was PFF did a top 50 free agents list a while ago, and one of the connections that they did have were Villanueva and Lindsley to the Chargers, maybe instead of another guard like Feliciano or Dooney. So I think that would be an interesting signing. I do think he's a little older, so I would kind of prefer to go through the draft, but I would certainly understand if the Chargers did it.
I would understand if they did it, and I think there's a chance that it depends on what they think of Sam Tevi, that there is some sort of backup tackle or swing tackle that's signed this offseason. But in terms of looking at a starter, not only does it work out for them where they pick, and then based on, let's say they do something similar to what we're doing in free agency here, it's pretty clear, at least set up for them to take a tackle within the first 2 rounds. Certainly in the first round, I think we all think is the most realistic. I'm kind of sick of watching band-aids go on this roster, this left tackle
Yeah.
spot. And granted, Telesco has drafted tackles before or guards and whatnot. It hasn't worked out. I'm not against, I think fans bring up that, we shouldn't draft a lineman because Telesco doesn't draft linemen well. Like,
Yeah.
okay, Telesco also drafted 2 quarterbacks and then drafted Justin Herbert. Now, granted, they weren't first round high priority guys, but like, I'm not just going to not draft someone because they didn't draft this thing well. If they're a good prospect, you draft them. So for me, I'm just not really into any of these guys coming in as a starting left tackle. Some of these depth guys, swing tackles, fine. But starters, no. I am all in at 13, at worst second round, but I'm all in on one of those draft picks for sure.
I mean, yeah, and the thing we talk about with tackles or taking guards in the draft and stuff is I think the Chargers haven't been doing that enough. And I know we all kind of think that, but that sort of compounded their issues last year, right? If you have Balaga and Turner and they don't work out for a year or they have injuries, right? They didn't really have a good backup plan. Maybe if you took a tackle in the second round or you took a guard in the third round, it would certainly ease the pain a little bit. And, hopefully it wouldn't have been a Trey Pipkins kind of type project. But I think they compounded their issues by not using any of the capital in the draft last year.
Yeah. And, really like this is another instance in which versatility comes into play because like, I understand why they wanted to give the full 16 games to Dan Feeney and let him be able to, have that full evaluation at center. But it really should have been as easy as putting Dan Feeney at right guard and putting Scott Quessenberry at center. But they refused to do that because they didn't feel like they had the versatility and the depth to do that. And that's just, that's why signing a guy like John Feliciano and drafting someone like Rayshon Slater, Elijah Vera Tucker, Landon Dickerson, who can play all 3 spots on the interior and probably play tackle too. If they needed him to. So I just think versatility needs to be the theme for the offensive line up front, and then they can figure out the positions later. But, I would understand it. I'm not going to be mad if they sign Alejandro Villanueva. I think he's been a really good player in the NFL. Just like Tyler, I'm sick of the Band-Aids, man. I just want them to be able to get their long-term future left tackle, which they haven't had since Marcus McNeil, which is just a tragedy. And so, if I were running an NFL team, I'm drafting an offensive lineman every single year within the first 3 rounds. And I don't really care about positions. Like, it's just such a valuable position group. You got to be able to have that quality depth. And the way that Tom Telesco has, I don't want to say neglected because he has made attempts. It's not really his fault.
Sure. That
Trey Turner couldn't stay healthy and that they went through 6 guards in one season. But, just the way that he hasn't drafted enough is my biggest, critique of Tom Telesco.
And he also needs to save his ass this season. He could be completely gone at the end of this year. I actually think this is the best opportunity for him to draft and then develop, not that he's developing, an offensive tackle or any offensive lineman, because I do think this staff seems to be the most competent and most, I assume, analytics, sports science driven to build this offensive line. So I do think he can look good and say, hey, well, the offensive line didn't work out before, but we have this new staff and now the offensive line is working out, which means I always had these good guys. It's just the staff that I had underneath me, these coaches, weren't really developing them. So if they develop now, I think he can save his ass. The other reason to take a tackle is because I think Tristan Wirfs is making $16 million over the next 4 years. And I think you would take that at 13.
It's a bargain.
Bargain. Huge, ridiculous bargain. I'm sure they'll extend him after like 2 more years. I don't think they have to wait till the 4th year. But yeah, taking a guy like that over our free agency right here is expensive. Like who we signed, a little expensive. And if you want like a Johnson or a Floyd and a Lindsley and a Feliciano, you got to make, some sort of cut, I guess. So you can't I don't want to go out and sign some George Fant deal for like 2 years, 20 million. Like get your tackle, pay him $4 or $5 million a year for the next 4 years and develop with Herbert.
Agreed. If we were running the team, I think we should go out and sign. Let's go out and sign Leonard Floyd and go, negative 20 million in cap or whatever. But no, I think that we've kind of laid it out. There's certainly some tough decisions that will need to be made in free agency, tough decisions in the draft. But I tend to agree. I favor going interior line in free agency, if that's what we're going to do with Corey Lindsley or Thune, Feliciano, any of those kind of guys we've been talking about. And then for the tackle spots, I think you go to the draft. and get a guy hopefully with the first round pick. And, like Tristan Wirfs, you play on that deal and then later on you extend him. And eventually when you do extend him, it's doable because Justin Herbert might not be expensive by then, might not be cheap by then. But, I think you'll have definitely at least 4 or 5 years of a pretty cheap first round tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just makes too much sense, man. It really does. And I understand, like, you don't want to pigeonhole yourselves, which I've already said, but it's just such a need. And at 13, if Rashawn Slater is there like we did in our mock draft, that's a no-brainer. And you can figure out the position later. I think he's a left tackle, but same with Elijah Vera Tucker. Samuel Cosme, I know a lot of people are kind of souring on him, but I think he's an option there. And I think Christian Darrisaw is an option there, even though I'm not super high on him. But I think they have the options to take a left tackle, and like, unless Patrick Surtain is there, like, Kyle Pitts isn't going to be there. I know everybody was kind of asking me about him this weekend. It makes too much sense to take an offensive lineman this year. And Tom Telesco, he's got to save his ass. Like Tyler said, man.
I will say that, okay, even if they don't take a tackle at 13, we at least addressed 2 starting spots on the offensive line. Like, if you want to take a guy in the second round and say you've upgraded 3 spots this offseason, I think that's great. If they can do 2, I'm happy with that. So they can go 2 free agents, 1 draft pick on a high pick. That's good enough for me. So they can, because we cut Hayward, we only have Davis. They can take their corner now at 13, and I would feel okay with that. If they fill 2 holes along the offensive line in free agency, that's when I would start being okay with them even taking, yes, I know, Waddle at 13.
Whoa, Tyler.
I know.
Wow.
Wow. You really changed. This is character development.
I will say too, like in this instance, right? Like they would have enough money to sign Sam Tevy back. Like, they could have Sam Tevy starting another year. Waiting I know everybody kind of hates it, man, but Sam Tevy was the best lineman on the team last year, dude. So, like, I'm not saying be a long-term starter. I'm not saying being a long-term starter.
I could have stood there like this and been the best offensive lineman on the team last season.
Oh man, I'm not saying long-term starter. Okay, I'm saying
you're right.
You bring Sam Tevy back.
Yes.
You draft a tackle in this case in the second round. I don't think Dylan Radunz is going to be there, but that would be a dream. You could take a chance on Walker Little, James Hudson. Liam Eichenberg's there. I'm not really into Alex Leatherwood on this team. So I think, in this kind of instance, you bring back Tevy, and if the rookie is not ready to start, you start Tevy. If the rookie is ready to start, then Tevy's the backup, and he's, a valuable swing tackle, which this team has not had, similar to the Marcus McNeil thing. They haven't had a valuable backup tackle in a very long time. And I think Sam Tevy as this primary swing tackle is not the worst thing in the world.
Yes, as the primary swing tackle and backup, that's great.
Right. It's kind of one of the reasons I think, someone like Popper said re-signing, Feeney, Lamp, and maybe Tevy is a little bit more likelier than we think, because if you can get them at that cheap price, maybe less than $5 million per year, and then you can kind of start them in a backup role or a starting role. I think that's kind of where people, like them, as opposed to them just being a full-time starter where they'll be more expensive.
Yeah, no doubt. So some other potential free agent targets, I think, I tweeted this out, but Von Miller, if he is not kept in Denver on his option, Spotrac only has his market value at 3 years, $30 million. So for me, I know there's the legal issues, but 3 for 30 for Von Miller, sign me up.
No, I agree. And if everything if the Chargers signed him, even if we didn't get official confirmation of what happened in that case and what's going on with that, if the Chargers signed him, it's not like the Cowboys and the Chiefs. If the Chargers signed him, I believe they've done their due diligence and they know that everything checks out for sure. Von Miller, I know it's been a year, but in 2019, he had 77 pressures.
Oh man,
please, put that on this team. That sounds so great if it checks out. And for $10 million a year.
Yeah, I think Von Miller might be kind of the one that's lurking in the distance. That would just make a whole lot of sense, to me, over a JJ Watt, over a Leonard Floyd. He's the guy that, obviously Chris Harris is already here. Brandon Staley obviously was his coach. that would make kind of a lot of sense if he were to come here. And also Ronaldo Hill. That's, you know, his one of the guys who was in Denver for a while. So you can bring him in as he's already as defense coordinator. So Von Miller would make a lot of sense. And I think in terms of value, you know, if people are kind of scared about that injury he suffered last year, that definitely works to the Chargers' favor.
Yep.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing about adding Von Miller too is that, like, who do you decide to double team? Like, are you going to double team Von Miller, or are you going to double team Joey Bosa? Like, man, that would just be some insane kind of versatility and potential for the Chargers to exploit there. You can put Joey Bosa rushing against a guard and Von Miller rushing on the outside on the same side, man. Like, oh man, the possibilities there are just outrageous.
And the way that the Broncos had it set up, where they had Von Miller as the younger guy and then DeMarcus Ware as that older veteran, like, that defense was so good. And I could see the exact same thing happening with like a younger Bosa and then Miller.
Yeah. So the last group that I want to talk about here just briefly is the cornerback room, because it is possible that Michael Davis is not back on this team. And in the scenario that we laid out, that maybe Casey Hayward is cut and they're replacing both of those, both, you know, outside corners, which would not be ideal, but it is possible. So maybe, you know, Alex had, you know, a big, I don't want to say attraction, but, you know, you were kind of into the idea of the Chargers, you know, bringing in Jack Del Rio as their head coach. Jack Del Rio did amazing work with Ronald Darby. You know, his spot track evaluation is only 4 for 36. If you're losing both Hayward and Davis, I think Ronald Darby is not, you know, the worst signing in the world.
Yeah, unless he's in the Eagles jersey, in which he gets completely burned by Amari Cooper down the field every time. I think Ronald Darby would be a solid signing. I mean, he's only going to cost, you know, $4 or $5 million. He's not that expensive. I do think there is some, you know, risk of him getting burned downfield, but he's younger than sort of a lot of the other corners on the market. Yeah. And I think that, you know, he makes a lot of sense, and he had kind of a rebound year, I think, in Washington. So, you know, if you can kind of get him in that Brandon Staley system, where obviously, you know, someone like Ronaldo Hill values those secondary players a lot, I think Ronald Darby could do pretty well.
Yeah, good call. I'll have to watch him. Sure. If Davis and Hayward are gone, you have to find somebody in free agency. I don't care who it is.
And then the other one really that's in a very similar tier to Michael Davis is William Jackson. Spotrac has his the former Cincinnati corner. Spotrac has his value similar, deal 3 for 28. And then the biggest name on the cornerback market in terms of young guys is Shaq Griffin. Spotrac has his value at 4 for 44. And then some people have mentioned Patrick Peterson. I don't think that's really all that likely, but his value is estimated at 3 for 30, which, you know, very similar to Von Miller. Could be kind of a cheap veteran signing, if you will. But I like we said, I think Michael Davis is definitely going to be back on this team.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Michael Davis is the most likely. And then, you know, if they do cut Casey Hayward, I think there's a lot of free agent options like Darby that could be interesting if they really want to make a big play at Patrick Peterson for a year or two. I wouldn't hate that because I think he fits the Staley system a little bit better. But he is a little older and is kind of clearly on the decline.
All right, guys. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
Not many. We have to get some news, so we have to stop creating this content for ourselves. Just give us a little bit of something, Adam Schefter.
Well, we'll see, man. They got the franchise tag is able to be placed upon players starting on Tuesday. So we could be having a conversation about Hunter Henry. Again, I think he's the only option in terms of franchise tag. But Tyler, any other thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, usually I do, but I have no thoughts right now. I'm just hungry.
It's 3:00, man.
Okay. I'm 25. I'm fucking hungry all the time. Okay.
I feel that, man. I feel that. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you're able to, kind of have some thoughts about some of these free agents. I think the Chargers are in a good spot with the cap, even if they don't cut Trey Turner and Casey Hayward. But, you know, like we laid out, it's a no-brainer to cut those guys and be able to sign kind of really whoever you want. Yep. So thanks for tuning in. We'll keep you guys posted. Obviously, if there is a franchise tag placed on Hunter Henry, we will have a great discussion about that. I can't wait to see if that happens. Other than that, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.